how to describe a line graph for IELTS. Hello there, welcome to this new episode. Just finished recording. This is a really good episode because we're going to go into some great detail how to describe a line graph for academic task 1, and you're going to get the instructions, the structure, and some phrases to use, and of course some tips. First of all, I've got some information for you. 5 things you can do to increase your chances of passing the IELTS exam. Number 1, sign up for free weekly tutorials and awesome practical guides. So go to the website IELTSPodcast.com and sign up. You get lots of information there. Another thing, fill your phone up with the podcasts or the MP3s and listen to them constantly, all the time, on the bus, when you're having breakfast, when you're waking up. Fill your head up with this information. Not only are you going to be practicing English, you're also going to be getting lots of practical advice to help you get through, to help you achieve the grade that you need. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. That's a massive help because you can usually see the words in front of you and you can associate sounds with the words you see and start increasing your comprehension levels and improving your pronunciation if you're repeating it as well. Another thing, subscribe in iTunes, get all the podcasts there as well, and if you've got time, leave me a review. So let's get to it. Now, part 1 is how to describe a line graph. We're going to look at what you need to do on the exam day, how to group the information, what to do for your introduction, what to do for your summary, and then the 5 tips. Then the second part, we're going to look at what you need, which would be good control of the of transferring it from the active to the passive voice. You need a good control of adverbs. There's a big list of verbs, some nouns. Then you've got some phrases for the introduction, some phrases for summaries, and some phrases for describing change. And you'll also get an exercise. So if you don't have a pen and paper with you, go and grab one now because it'll be definitely beneficial. Let's get cracking. So decide what will be in each paragraph. Okay, this is what you need to do. You need to group the information. Now, you can't see it, of course, because you listen to the podcast. However, if you go to the website, you'll be able to find the post, go to podcast number 66, and you'll be able to see all the graphic information. You'll be able to see the whole presentation. But there's a graph I'll be using to describe as an example, and it's basically UK supermarket sales between 2001 and 2009, okay, in £1,000,000 sterling. And I'll just briefly describe it. There's 5 lines, each one representing a supermarket: Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, Morrison's, and the Co-op. Now, in this stage, when you see the graph, what you need to do is group it, okay? And I recommend doing 4 paragraphs in total. 1 for your introduction, 1 for your main body paragraph number 1, then main body paragraph number 2, and then for the conclusion, a final paragraph. Now, when you're grouping the information, I'm telling you about the grouping the information first, because when you're in the exam room, what you need to do is get a solid plan together and then follow the plan. So I always recommend that you plan your essays, you plan your body paragraphs, get a rough idea about what you're going to do, and then when you start writing, you start off with your introduction, which I'll tell you how to do in a second. Then you transfer your notes from your plan, body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, and then you stick in your conclusion. So that's why I'm describing, that's why I'm trying to teach you now how to group the information. So with the graph I can see in front of me, there are 2 companies that represent more or less similar evolution. So in the first paragraph, I'm going to talk in detail about these 2 because they're the ones that have basically just increased all the way. And then in the next paragraph, I'll talk about the second grouping, which is the ones which haven't done as well, which have leveled off and just remained stable for the second part. And I'll mention one, which is the exception, the co-op, which rose, stabilized, and then sank or leveled off. So I get the rough plan in front of me. Okay, then I keep it apart, and then I go straight into the introduction. So for the introduction, what I strongly recommend you do is you write one sentence that describes the graph and the general idea. So in this case, if I describe the graph, I'll say the line graph clearly shows the evolution of, the line graph shows the sales of 5 UK supermarkets between 2001 and 2009. Now that's one description, but what I recommend is that you do both, where you describe what the graph is and the general idea of what the graph is trying to communicate. So this is another introduction you could use. From the line graph, it is clear that the majority of the UK supermarkets saw sales grow over the 10-year period. And that's general, it's almost like the summary. But I've also described what the actual graph is showing. So just to summarize, describe what the graph is, what it's showing, and what it's trying to describe as well. Okay, now sometimes you won't be as fortunate and you'll get one that just has lots of different data and there's no clear pattern. So you just basically say that. You can say, from the line graph, it is clear that there is no constant pattern with regards to student enrollments in the United States over the period shown, or over the 50-year period. And I describe what's roughly on both axes, what the graph is showing, the actual subject of the graph, in this case the companies, or in the other case the students, the enrollments, and what it's trying to describe. Now then, and now for your summary, then do pretty much the same, but you don't have to describe, of course, the graph, but you can go into a little bit more detail. Now in this case, what I would say is I would go in and mention the major players. Not all the major players, but, well, it depends on the graph. Here I've only got about 5, so I can mention them all. If I had more, I would probably say, I'd probably just group them and say the northern countries, or the, let's see, the majority of the western suppliers, or whatever. Okay, in this case, because I've got 5, I can go into a little bit of detail and basically summarize each one. So here I'll say, overall, it is clear that Tesco and Sainsbury's increased sales the most, followed by Asda and Morrison's. The Co-op undoubtedly performed the worst. So just to quickly summarize what we do, this is the process. Step 1, identify the information, group it, and start planning your body paragraph 1 and 2. Write a rough plan for each one. Step 2, write your introduction. Describe briefly what the graph is and the general idea. And then step 3, write your body paragraphs following very closely the plan you wrote before, and then write your summary. And if you can, include the maximums, the minimums, and even the exceptions. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is, in the summary, go into a little bit more detail than in the introduction. Now, some 5 tips. Number 1, your opinion is not necessary. Maybe you know the reason why the sales fell or why gold prices increased, but do not mention it. It's not necessary, because what you have to do is a purely objective task, which is describe the bar chart in front of you. Check to make sure the subject and the verb agree. That's a very common problem. Avoid basic words, big, small, good, bad. Words like these, we can usually use more sophisticated vocabulary. Unlike your IELTS Task 2 essay, you do not need a topic sentence in the introduction. You just need to do it like I said before. And in the final paragraph, this is your summary paragraph, not your conclusion. So do not use to conclude. Use in summary or overall we can see blah blah blah. Now then, let's have a look at the grammar you would need and the verbs and the nouns and all the rest of it. So first of all, a good skill to have to show that the examiner, you know a variety of structures, is to transform the words, the sentences from active to passive. So let's go through 3 examples here, and I want you to try and transform them before I do. So, sales crashed to new levels. How would we transform that to the passive? We would say there was a crash to new levels in sales. Now, if we wanted to change the sales rose quickly, how would we change that? We would say there was a quick rise in the sales, or quick rise in sales. Another one, employment fell drastically. We could say there was a drastic fall in employment. Some more. Let's go from passive to active. And this is basically doing the same but in reverse. So here's the first one for you to transform. There was an incredible decrease in output. There was an incredible decrease in output. How would we transform that? We would say output decreased incredibly. I'll say a few more, write them down, and then try and change them. In 2010, there was a plunge in turnover. Transform that. In 2010, there was a plunge in turnover. Of course, turnover plunged in 2010. After the crisis, there was a crash in profit. The transformation, profit crashed after the crisis. Now, let's have a look at adverbs. If we have an it is sentence, for example, it is clear the trend is downward, well, we can transform that and we can say clearly the trend is downward. Another way, I'll give you another example. It is evident that sales dropped in the first quarter. Here we could say evidently sales in the first quarter dropped. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you a variety of different structures that you can use in the exam to increase your grammatical range and pick up some points. Now here are some useful expressions. Hopefully you've got a pen in front of you and you can write these down, because one, not only is it going to increase the chances that you remember them, but you'll also have a handy list in front of you. So let's go. Over a 5-year period. And of course you can adapt that. Over a 10-year period, over a 5-day period. Here's another one. Throughout the 1980s. Or throughout the 1990s, throughout the 1810s. It just shows the actual duration. Throughout the 1980s, sales were climbing consistently, for example. Here's another one. The period from 1944 to 1999 witnessed spectacular growth, for example. The period from 1950 to 1960 witnessed explosive growth. And then another one, from that time on, so we could have said in July sales fell, and from that time on they continued to fall until May. Okay, so Hopefully you've wrote those down and you've got a nice list of time expressions. Here are some useful verbs, and here's a tip as well. Get used to using these verbs and learn the past of these verbs, the past form. For example, sink, sank, sunk. Yeah, and fall, fell, fallen. For the ones that describe a downfall, a negative action, we've got plunge, crash, tumble, sink, fall, drop, decline. And once again, we're just improving the lexical resource. So write them down and try and incorporate them in the next essay you write. Plunge, crash, tumble, sink, fall, drop and decline. And then some verbs that describe a stabilization. We've got stabilize, remain stable, remain constant, level off, and then one describes the opposite, fluctuate. And we can also say fluctuates violently. That's a nice little collocation there. And then we've got the positive verbs, the verbs to describe upward trends. That would be rocket, sales rocketed in the first quarter, sales soared, sales surged, or population levels leapt in the second quarter. So just to put it in the infinitive, leap, surge, soar, rocket. Now, if you're using a strong verb like rocket, soar, or surge, or leap, we do not need to modify it. So we do not need to say skyrocketed or rocketed upwards. It's sufficiently clear by just using these verbs. Let's have a look at some phrases to use for the introduction. Also write these down and start incorporating them in your essays. From the graph, it is clear, as can be seen from the line graph, as is shown by the table, as is illustrated by the pie chart. So 4 quite generic sentences that we can use in the introduction, and we can use them in the exam room, and we start writing and we do not get any of the mind block or mind goes blank because you start writing straight away. Here's a list of phrases to describe the change. Write these down as well. It'll help you remember them. The number of consumers decreased tenfold. The number of consumers decreased tenfold. Sales doubled to reach 55% of the total in 1923. Sales doubled to reach 55% of the total in 1923. Production stood at the same level in the following century. The influx of new competitors remained constant. The steady decline was maintained throughout the 1980s. The steady decline was maintained throughout the 1980s. Internet traffic practically doubled. Internet traffic practically doubled. So what I'm hoping you are doing is writing these down, and hopefully you'll be able to see how that you can link them with the time phrases. For example, internet traffic practically doubled throughout the 1950s. Or internet traffic practically doubled from 1980 to the year 2000. Okay. Now, here's a very good exercise to do, which will help you improve your listening and will help you get to grips with some advanced vocabulary and sentence structure. So I want you to now, instead of writing, well, you can write as well, it might help you, but I want you to draw the actual line graph that I describe. It's only a small graph, maybe it's about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, pretty simple. And you can go to the website, put IELTS Podcast 66 line graph into Google, find the blog post, and then check your drawings with the drawings of the of the blog post. So here's the first one. The price reached a peak before falling a little and then maintaining the same level. Here's a good tip. Draw it as you hear it. The price reached a peak before falling a little, then maintaining the same level. Next one. The sales of our products fell slightly in the final quarter. The sales of our products fell slightly in the final quarter. The value of the shares has shown a steady decline. The value of the shares has shown a steady decline. Sales fluctuated violently, then leveled out towards the end of the period. One more time. Sales fluctuated violently, then leveled out towards the end of the period. The investment levels rose suddenly after an initially flat period. Next one. The research and development budget grew sharply, then steadied briefly, only to resume climbing in the final quarter. One more time. The research and development budget grew sharply, then steadied briefly, only to resume climbing in the final quarter. The sudden collapse in share prices came shortly after June. The sudden collapse in share prices came shortly after June. There has been a steady increase in costs over several years. There has been a steady increase in costs over several years. So hopefully you wrote out every single description. If you didn't, maybe you could go back, listen to those again and write it out, and then try and draw the description which corresponds to your written description. Sorry, try and draw the graph which corresponds to your written description. So here are the answers. This is for the video. You can see the answers. If not, you'll have to just go to the blog post. Sorry about that. No point trying to describe it. By the way, you'll probably notice that all of these descriptions and exercises that I'm talking about today is all financial vocabulary. And the reason I decided to do the whole podcast using financial vocabulary is because there is an increased chance that you're going to hear the same words once, twice, 3 times. So it'll help you remember it, and you'll get some topic specific vocabulary related to finance and economics. Right then. So that's the end of this podcast and video. There's just 5 more things you can do to increase your chances of scoring high. I said them at the beginning. First one, go to the podcast, sign up, and you get a free PDF there, 20 Band 9 IELTS Task 2 essays and about 250 IELTS Task 2 questions. The second thing you can do is fill up your phone with the free podcasts. Just absolutely fill it up and just listen 24/7 for breakfast, for dinner, when you're on the bus, when you're at university, whenever. Just make use of that dead time. Third thing, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get to stay up to date with anything new, any new videos, tutorials. Subscribe to the iTunes podcast, which you've probably done. And if you don't mind, could you leave me a nice big fat 5-star review? Well, yeah, if you're not going to leave a 5-star one, don't do it. I don't mind, whatever. Just please, I'd prefer a 5-star one, of course. And final thing, if you're having some difficulty, remember you can just shoot me an email, IELTSPodcast@gmail.com, and I'll respond, okay? And just tell us what the biggest difficulty is, okay? Right then, hope everything is going well. If you didn't get the results you aimed for, send me an email, I can help you out. And if you don't send me an email, well, I just hope that you carry on pushing and eventually you will get there. All the best.